What happened was...
Hey friends, it's so nice to see you. It's today, the time is now. You are here and the weather is outside your window.
Well, hello, and welcome to a very special episode of What Happened Was. It's special because it's currently Broadway Week in New York City. That's right, Broadway Week. And actually, the entire month of September is Broadway Week. What started as a week-long celebration grew and was so popular that the entire month of September now is called Broadway Week. So what is Broadway Week? Well, it's a celebration of, you guessed it, all things Broadway. And what is Broadway? Here's a common misconception. Broadway is not just a street, right? So a Broadway theater doesn't mean that it's on the street Broadway. It can be, but there are actually only 4 theaters on the street that's named Broadway, and there are over 40 Broadway theaters. So what makes a Broadway theater? Well, it's in the theater district in New York, so that's roughly from Times Square all the way up to Lincoln Center. And to be a Broadway theater, you have to have more than 500 seats in the audience. That's per Actors Equity Association, the union responsible for Broadway actors. If a theater has under 500 seats, it's considered off-Broadway. So off-Broadway, under 500 seats. Broadway, over 500 seats. Broadway theaters in the theater district between Times Square and Lincoln Center, not necessarily on the street called Broadway. And the street Broadway, the avenue itself, is actually the longest street in New York. It stretches 33 miles, well outside of New York City, up into the Bronx and even all the way up to Albany. It's quite interesting. So I myself am a Broadway veteran. I started my career on Broadway in 2007 in the play Coram Boy, and then I went on to be in South Pacific at Lincoln Center for almost 2 years, and then I played Lurch in The Addams Family on Broadway for 2 years. So all in all, I did 8 shows a week for about 5 years of my life, and I loved it, and I'm so eager to return to Broadway when the time is right. It's a tough life. Doing 8 shows a week is really difficult. You get 1 day off typically, and you do matinees 3 times a week, and a lot of times you do 2 show days, and it's really tiring, but it's really, really fun to be a part of that community and to entertain people who come to see these shows. Broadway is such a tourist attraction. Many people come to New York just to see Broadway shows. And actually the revenue of Broadway yearly beats the revenue of all the New York City sports teams combined. Can you believe that? That's right. Theater beats sports, the one place where it does. Now, do you know the answer to this question? What is the longest running Broadway show? Any guesses? I'll give you a hint. It's a show that has opera in the title, and many people say their favorite opera is this Broadway show. That's right, Phantom of the Opera. And yes, technically it is not an opera, it is a musical that takes place in an opera house, but there is operatic singing. And I say if you want to say that's your favorite opera, it's totally okay. So Phantom of the Opera is the longest running Broadway show, followed by Chicago. Now, there are many long-running Broadway shows that have been around for a long time. Wicked, The Lion King, and The Lion King, in fact, is the highest grossing Broadway show of all time. That means out of all the Broadway shows that have ever run, The Lion King has made the most money. Now, there are some other statistics that you're less likely to hear, and that is the shortest running Broadway shows. We call those flops. Now, I was a part of a show that was arguably a flop in that it closed after a month, and we thought we would run for a year at least. And so a lot of times when a Broadway show opens and the reviews come out and they are unkind and the audience isn't showing up to the box office, the show unfortunately closes, and it's devastating. So, I thought I'd share a list with you of some Broadway shows that you probably have never heard of because they are what we call flops. So here's a list of some shows that ran for only 1 performance. That means they opened, the reviews came out, and they were so bad that they closed the next day. A Teaspoon Every 4 Hours. 1 performance. Blood Red Roses, Break a Leg, Cleavage, Dance a Little Closer, Father's Day, First One Asleep Whistle, Frank Merriwell, Gandhi, The Goodbye People, Heathen, Here's Where I Belong, Home Sweet Homer, I Won't Dance, Kelly, Lestrada, Little Johnny Jones, The Mooney Shapiro Songbook, Moose Murders, Oldest Living Confederate Widow Tells All, Onward Victoria, Play Me a Country Song, Rainbow Jones, Ring Around the Bathtub, Take Me Along, Total Abandon, The Utter Glory of Morrissey Hall, Wild and Wonderful, Medea and Jason, Teaneck Tansy the Venus Flytrap, A Race of Hairy Men, Bring Back Birdie, Horses in Midstream, and there are many others that went on to play less than a week of performances before closing. So if you're at all interested, I'd investigate some of those. You might find an interesting cast album out there of songs you've never heard and almost no one has ever heard. Imagine that maybe only a few hundred people on the planet ever saw any of those shows. I would be remiss not to mention the pandemic and its effect on Broadway attendance. Certainly the industry is struggling to make a full recovery, and that can be seen most evidently in the list of Broadway shows currently running. It's a smaller number than most years, and it's dominated by musicals. So here's a list of the Broadway shows currently running in New York. 1776, Aladdin, Beetlejuice, The Book of Mormon, Chicago, Come From Away, Cost of Living, Dear Evan Hansen, Death of a Salesman, Funny Girl, Hadestown, Hamilton, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, Into the Woods, The Kite Runner, Leopoldstadt, The Lion King, MJ, the Michael Jackson musical, Moulin Rouge, The Music Man, The Phantom of the Opera, Six, A Strange Loop, and Wicked. How many have you heard of, and how many have you seen? You can listen to the cast albums of most of these shows from the comfort of your home, and a lot of them have really fun clips on YouTube, videos of the cast performing live. Now, just like many things, Broadway has its season. It ebbs and flows. September and January traditionally are very difficult months for Broadway. It's right when school goes back in session and tourists are less likely to be in New York seeing shows, and then of course right after the holidays in January, it's also quite bleak. Having done a comedy on Broadway, I can tell you that we had many shows in January where we had very few laughs out in the audience and many, many empty seats. And it's tough, but you have to remember that if one person is there, you gotta do a good show. That's your job. Well, I thought we'd wrap up this special Broadway Week episode with a countdown of my top 10 favorite musicals of all time. Number 10 is Jason Robert Brown's Broadway musical Parade, which premiered at Lincoln Center Theater. It's the true story of Leo Frank, who was falsely accused of murder in Marietta, Georgia. It sounds dark, but it's an incredible love story and incredible music that brings this really heart-wrenching tale to life. Number 9 is the Lynn Ahrens and Stephen Flaherty musical, Ragtime, an enormous show that is so hard to pull off. When it premiered on Broadway, it had an all-star cast: Audra McDonald, Marin Mazzie, Brian Stokes Mitchell. It is such an incredible show, all about America being a melting pot and people coming here from other countries to find a better life. Number 8 is near and dear to my heart, and that is Rodgers and Hammerstein's South Pacific, which I did on Broadway for 2 years. Now, this show was so cutting edge when it came out. It was one of the first shows on Broadway to deal with the topic of racism, and it was very controversial at the time. Imagine just having ended World War II and troops returning home if they're lucky, and people going to the theater and seeing this show which dealt with World War II. And there was a song called You Have to Be Carefully Taught, and Lieutenant Cable sings it, and it's all about how you have to be taught to be racist, you have to be educated that others are bad, right? And that if someone's different from you, it's something that you should be scared of. And the producers went to Rodgers and Hammerstein shortly before opening, and they said, you have to cut that song, it's too controversial. And they said, we're not cutting that song is the show. So if you want the show to open, that song stays in. Number 7 is Lin-Manuel Miranda's In the Heights. Very special show. It actually follows an old school model for musicals like Oklahoma and Fiddler on the Roof, and takes a community that's being displaced and sets it in modern day Washington Heights, New York. And of course, it was one of the first Broadway shows to incorporate rap and hip hop, which is now very prevalent in Broadway shows, just like Hamilton, Lin-Manuel's other big hit. Number 6 is Cole Porter's Anything Goes, a wonderful show set on a ship. What can go wrong? So much fun. The songs are all hits, and there's tap dancing on a ship in the middle of the ocean. Number 5, Jesus Christ, Superstar. I mean, come on, epic, an epic Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. Huge, intense, emotional, rock. It's such a hard show to sing, and there's a reason it is a number 1 hit and still touring the world to this day. Number 4 is Stephen Sondheim's Into the Woods. Into the Woods is so special to me in that I don't think I'd be an actor without this show. I was majoring in percussion at Florida State University when I saw a flyer for auditions for a community theater production of Into the Woods. I went to the audition, I got cast, and the next day I changed my major to theater, and the rest is history. Into the Woods combines fairy tales that we all know, and it brings them to life in this way that really humanizes these characters. And just when you think everything is going well, Act 2 comes and we go to a really dark place with these fairy tales, and it really hits on themes of family and parent-child relationship in a very special way, which is common in Stephen Sondheim's works. Number 3 is one of my favorite musicals of all time. I saw it on the West End recently. There's also a film starring Jennifer Hudson and Beyonce. I'll give you 1 second to think about what it might be. Dreamgirls. Yes, Dreamgirls. What an incredible show. It moves just nonstop at a fast pace. And when I saw it, people were on their feet several times during the show because it's so exciting and visceral, yet at the same time so heartbreaking and difficult to watch this woman's dream be shattered. Number 2, my favorite Broadway musical of all time is Sweeney Todd. One that I've done all over. I love this show so much. Another one that I don't think I would be an actor without this show. It is so important to me. It's so gruesome about a barber who murders victims, and the woman in the meat pie shop below who turns the victims into pies and feeds the neighborhood. You would just think, how could anyone ever make a musical out of this? But Stephen Sondheim did it, and it's brilliant. And there's a reason. There's a movie of it starring Johnny Depp, and everything from Broadway to regional theaters to opera companies are doing Sweeney Todd all the time because it is phenomenal and gripping. It's something that's hard to pull off on a musical stage, and that is a thriller or a horror. It's hard to scare an audience, and Sweeney Todd really is edge of your seat when done right. And my number 1 favorite Broadway musical of all time is Stephen Sondheim's A Little Night Music. It's funny, it's heartbreaking, it's touching, it's personal, it's glorious, and this music is just something I could listen to every single day. It features a strong ensemble cast of people who have to be great singers and great comedians and great dramatic actors, and it places them in these really intimate settings, all about love, and it is just a wild evening of theater that ends with one of the most bittersweet endings a show can ever have. Quite beautiful. And for me, it's the music. It is phenomenal, and there is this theme of this French horn that just constantly is pulling at your heart, and it's very, very personal and beautiful. And that's my list of my top 10 favorite Broadway musicals of all time. It might change. You never know. I am seeing shows all the time. I was really excited to see several shows this Broadway season, including the Tony Award-winning Strange Loop, as well as Funny Girl and many others. And I just love going to live theater, and I love seeing my colleagues and friends up on stage and backstage doing their thing and drawing tourists in from all over the world to see live theater in New York City. So whether you can get to New York or not, I hope you celebrate Broadway week by maybe watching some clips of Broadway shows on YouTube, or go to your regional theater and support. There's also many Broadway touring shows traveling the world at all times, so get out there and enjoy some live theater.
That's all for today's episode. Puppies and rainbows till we meet again.